Today, I'm a very happy man, and that's because we're going to talk about one of my favorite video game topics of all time, arcade games. I love arcade games. They're varied, they're easy to drop in and drop out, won't take too much of your time, usually come with a 2-player mode so you can bring a friend along, and they sport some of the greatest pixel art to ever exist to this very day. Just take a look at SNK's output. But if you were to ask me what is the coolest thing about arcades, it's definitely not the crowds or socialization. What, are you crazy? Haven't you noticed that I'm an antisocial hermit who lives under a rock? No. The thing I enjoyed the most is something that appealed to me from the very beginning, but actually it took quite some time before I could nail it down. What appealed to me was the sheer variety in gameplay styles, graphical power, and even straight up control schemes in arcades, because you see, when you develop and sell a home console, they usually come with a controller that's standard for that system, and that's it. As a game developer, you have to design your game knowing that it will be limited by the controller the console manufacturers decided on, unless you take the extra cost of bundling in an accessory. But not on arcades. On arcades, developers didn't need to limit their ideas based on hardware because they produced the hardware, or maybe they were partners with a company that would produce the hardware based on their necessities, and because of that, you could play their games solely on their terms rather than on the terms of a console manufacturer. If you imagine it, and if you could mold it in plastic, you could theoretically add it to the machine. And even the boards on the inside of each machine were different, they didn't need all to follow the same standard, and thus you could just walk into an arcade and you could have the very first games with graphics that wouldn't look odd running on the NES, and suddenly bam, you ran into a game with graphics far beyond that, right next to it. And then, even further, there could be a cabinet with a game that looked like a Renaissance masterpiece, and they could have 2 buttons and a joystick, or 4 buttons, or 6 buttons, or gun controllers, or even driver seats, or jet ski seats as well. Why not? Hell, just look at all the current games out in modern Japanese arcades right now, and you'll see all sorts of crazy control schemes. The sky is the limit when it comes to arcades! Okay, that was a slight exaggeration. Naturally, there's a limit to all of that. And I'm not saying that they made completely new boards for every single game all the time. They naturally reused whatever they could for as long as they felt like they could, while still, remaining relevant, while developing all sorts of upgrades in the backgrounds so they wouldn't fall behind their competitors. And I'm sure there's quite a few ideas that were just too crazy to put in practice, that are probably filed away in some dusty cabinet at Sega headquarters, though it must have been pretty crazy given that they have driving simulators out there that are just entire cars. Japanese arcades are pretty wild. And of course, there was the inconvenience of having to leave home, if you're an antisocial shut-in like I am, and having to put in a lot of quarters in the machines depending on how bad you were, and cabinets were expensive, and you don't have like infinite space on your house to just buy dozens of them, so I can definitely understand why they went out of style. Now, I know that we are talking about computers and consoles, and naturally they don't have all of the plastic to, just be an arcade, but if only we had a way to capture even a fragment of the glory of those days. Maybe a collection of arcade games that covered multiple titles, not just in the same franchise, but maybe from a whole company. And if those titles covered all sorts of different eras, so you could just feel the variety and progress that I talked about as we play through them, wouldn't that be wonderful? Yeah, it's Capcom Arcade Stadium. Sorry it took so long to get to the point. We are talking about Capcom Arcade Stadium today. Capcom Arcade Stadium is the latest attempt by Capcom to cash in on nostalgia for the better days. Following the Street Fighter collection, the Beat 'em Up collection, and the straight up just an arcade controller that you can plug on your TV, this time they've decided to just straight up bring 30 games from all sorts of different eras, and they brought them in style. Honestly, just starting the game up shows a screen with a drawing of all of the different characters from all of the different games in an adorable cartoon style, and when the actual title screen shows up, you're just blasted with the theme song. Because yes, this game compilation has its own damn theme song. Press any button, and if it is your first time around, you will have to read through an ungodly amount of pop-up explanations. But past that, you get this fully 3D endless line of arcade cabinets just waiting to be played. The presentation is just excellent. It's definitely my favorite presentation out of all of the game compilations that I've played. It reminds me of the 5th anniversary Namco Museum collection, but with 10 times more style. But presentation isn't everything. We're here to play actual arcade games, and in arcades, gameplay was king. Okay, that's a bit of a lie. If the games didn't have a nice presentation, how would they attract people to spend money on their cabinet, you know? But gameplay was definitely important. You came for the giant robots, but you stayed because the giant robots punch shit good. So, how is the game selection here? It's pretty damn good. Almost all of my favorites are here, and there's stuff I've never played before that I love. Do you know, for example, about this game called Mega Twins? I found out about it in this collection, and it's this super cool platformer that got simplified for the arcades, you know, it got more simple gameplay, but it's still so full of charm, and I absolutely love it. It's nothing too complex, it just appeals both to the part of my brain that enjoys colorful platformers, as well as the part of my brain that likes stabbing shit. And what about Pirate Ship Higemaru? It's like Pac-Man, except you have to kill the ghosts by throwing barrels at them in order to advance, but the level is made out of barrels, so every barrel you remove adds another way for a ghost to attack you, so you have to watch out as you constantly reshape the level, and also instead of ghosts, they're pirates. So basically, it's not like Pac-Man at all, but it is amazing, even though it's a very early arcade game, and where has this been all my life? If that's not your style though, they've also got some Street Fighter games, basically 3 different versions of Street Fighter 2, but also Bionic Commando. Bet you didn't know there was an arcade version of Bionic Commando, I sure as hell didn't. The collection is definitely biased towards shooting games though. Out of 30 games, 13 are shoot 'em ups. They are the most represented genre. And you do get a lot of cool stuff in this, some of which hasn't been released officially in quite a while, if at all. Like all of the 1990-something games, which are very famous in the shoot 'em up scene. I had never played any of them before, and this collection gave me the opportunity to play all of them in order, so now I can officially act superior to other people when I state that the series peaked with 1990X, and if you disagree, you're a pleb. But the most interesting shoot 'em up here, and arguably the best shoot 'em up here, period, is definitely Pro Gear, which should be no surprise since it was developed by the shoot 'em up veterans at Cave and only got published by Capcom. But just take a look. This game is gorgeous. I love the steampunkish look of the setting, and it's super fun to play as well. Not to mention, Cave managed to shove in relationship values in an arcade shoot 'em up of all places. You get to pick a pilot and a gunner at the beginning of the game, and depending on how you play, they will get closer to each other, resulting in different endings. Talk about replay value, aka trying to steal as many quarters from weebs as possible in the 90s. Oh wait, this was originally released in 2001? What the fuck? But we could stay here all day long while I list my favorites. Let's instead talk about something more universal, something that will play a part on everyone's experiences, regardless of which games they decide to play. And those are the display and game options that are available to the player. And quite honestly, this game is an absolute master in this regard. When it comes to display options, everything you could have wanted is here. You want to play on a 3D arcade model for that extra fancy look while not pushing the image too far beyond the limits they were intended to be displayed on? You can do that. You want it to be full screen, but you want some images on the side so you don't stretch the image? You can do it. You want to just stretch the shit out of it anyway? Be my guest. CRT filters, or do you want to play it in Tate mode? Absolutely go ahead. Everything is here. And when it comes to game options, it's even better. Every game comes with their own set of options based on the options that were available on their original arcade counterparts. From difficulty levels to the number of lives each continue grants you, and depending on the game, even the score mark you must reach before you can get an extra life is all customizable. In-game, you can perform the now omnipresent feature of rewinding failures, which sounds kind of useless when you have infinite quarters. But given some of the games have the balls to reset your progress when you die, instead of just instantly respawning you where you died, I can assure that the casuals among us will get some use out of this. I surely did, scrub that I am. What's less common though is the option of slowing down the game if it's too fast for you, and even alternatively speeding it up and going full turbo if it is too slow for you. All of this is accompanied, of course, by save states and even a score challenge mode that turns all of that off in order for the true purists to chase that sweet high score and post it online for all to see. Which I hope hasn't been hacked in the last few days since I took a look at it. The amount of options is just amazing. They really give you all of the options necessary for you to experience the games however you want. But if there is one piece of disappointment in this overwhelmingly good package, is the lack of extras. Extras are, by nature, not a part of the main feature of any game, they're just neat bonuses to round out the full package. So while I'm not really going to say dock points per se just because they aren't here, it is really weird to see a game compilation these days that doesn't offer anything in terms of concept art or a music replay room. But honestly, the main feature you've come here for, the actual games, they are so damn good, it just doesn't really matter. So that's the Capcom Arcade Stadium, an incredibly good collection that has both quality and quantity in spades. Despite really liking arcade games, I have to admit I'm not much of a hardware buff, so I can't tell you if the input lag is too bad compared to the originals or anything like that. You'd have to go to an actual person that actually knows what he's talking about to understand that, to see if that's the case here. But for me, this is definitely the best way to experience all of these titles. Except maybe unless you have access to them in their original arcade format. In that case, that's just fantastic for you, and I guess you can skip this. But if that's truly the case, then we are left with a final, very uncomfortable question. Why are the Steam reviews for this so damn low? Okay, full disclosure, this part is not on the script or anything that I'm talking to you right now. I just decided to do this to tell you one very interesting fact, and that is that I took a picture of the reviews when the game was first released because they were very negative and I didn't know if they were going to be that way for long, but I lost the original picture, so I went there again and I saw that it was still very negative, and I took a picture and I saved it this time, because I thought that eventually it would get like positive or at the very least mixed as the time went on and more people who enjoyed the games picked it up. But no, I took another picture that I'm going to show on the screen right now, right before I finished editing this, and it is still very negative no matter in which period of time I took the picture, and that's really bad for Capcom, but it's very amusing for me that the reviews for this just indicate that it is a complete dumpster fire. Now this is where we have to dive a bit deeper into the unpleasant territory that I don't think I ever really touched upon in this channel, so forgive my lack of experience as I talk about the straight up unpleasant topic of bad business practices. All you need to do is take a quick look through the Steam reviews to see why people dislike this release so much. First things first, one of the most common complaints I saw was that this compilation is free to download, but it only comes with 9043 for free. You have to pay for the rest of the games. And when I read that, all I could think of was, well, what were you expecting? It's obvious Capcom wouldn't go to all of the trouble of repackaging these games inside this brand new presentation and include all sorts of extra options if they couldn't turn a profit from it. Expecting that Capcom would just put all of these games up for free is a bit unreasonable, no? Maybe it's just me, and I certainly would have picked the game that better represented the quality of the collection instead of what we got, like 9043's direct sequel, 9041, which is better, but not the best, and more exciting even if it is shorter, and I think would represent this collection better and give a better first impression, since 9043 is kind of very old school and very repetitive. But what game would you personally give out as a free sample is honestly incredibly subjective, and you can write a comment about your personal choice and we can argue all day if you want. But I'm personally more interested in the number one complaint that shows up, even within the same reviews that contain the complaint that I just talked about. And the complaint is that you can't buy the games individually. And with that, I wholeheartedly agree, because you see, Capcom Arcade Stadium isn't a one-time $40 purchase, oh no, instead you must purchase games in bundles, with 3 bundles available, each one covering a different time span of Capcom's release catalog. And just like Ubisoft's terrible collector's edition and collectors of the collector's edition, this just makes your purchase naturally a nightmare. Do I buy all of the bundles? Do I purchase just one, and if so, which one? The one that is mostly composed of games that you like? Or the one that contains your favorite, even if it comes with a lot of stuff you don't care about? If you're completely new to all of these games, maybe you could make the most of it by purchasing only the one covering the newest era, since they would be theoretically the most polished games, but is it worth it missing out on their origins? And why the fuck is Ghosts and Goblin a completely separate purchase from everything else? To make matters worse, some of these games got released previously in other bundles. All of the Street Fighter games available here were bundled previously on the Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection, and 5 of the 7 beat-em-ups from Capcom's beat-em-up bundle are also here, so if you've been buying Capcom's previous releases, chances are you will inevitably end up with a few duplicate purchases if you buy this one. And all of this could have been easily solved if only Capcom allowed you to simply buy individual games. They even have individual prices on Steam right now, but unfortunately you can only buy them in bundles. If that was it, that would already have been an incredible deal breaker to people who only wanted to buy a few titles. But there's more! On top of this major offense, Capcom Arcade Stadium commits a series of other minor offenses as well. The Street Fighter games, for example, got the Rising Sun symbol and the Hong Kong flag removed. You want some display frames to put on the sides of the screen that are themed after each individual game while you play them? Well, fuck you, pay for it. Speaking of extra payments, you also have to pay for an invisibility cheat as well. And what is perhaps the most personal of my complaints, and one that I don't think many people will have, but that I want to talk about anyway, is that Powered Gear does not come with an English version. And it's such a shame too, because Powered Gear is one of the most story-heavy games in the collection, which was a rarity in arcade times, and it even serves as a prequel to Cyberbots, which is also featured within this very compilation. I could understand if they didn't have the rights to use the English ROM. Mercs appear in this release only as Senjo no Okami 2, since they probably couldn't get the rights to use the English ROM. But in the beat-em-up bundle released a couple of years back, the game is there, completely translated into English, with no issues, and as far as I know, unlike Mercs, Capcom completely owns all of the rights to the IP. So why was the English release not included? As a quick side note, I'd also like to mention that the launch of this compilation was extremely strange. If you were one of the few people that, like me, bought this at launch immediately and immediately downloaded it and wanted to see all of the cool games that they got there, then you'd probably be incredibly surprised to find that yes, only 10 of the games were available, 1/3 of the collection. If that happened to you, I just want you to know that you are not crazy. This also happened to me, and after a few hours, or just 1 hour maybe, I don't remember the exact timing, 10 more games were available. And then after another wait, the last 10 games were available. Well, 31 if you count Ghosts and Goblin. But still, it's incredibly strange that I bought all of the games and yet they weren't all immediately available on release. I actually got a little bit nervous, wondering if Capcom saw that I purchased those, and I went to the store and yes, I had purchased everything, and yet even the launch of this game was botched. In a truly incredibly weird way too. It wasn't a big deal, but maybe I should have taken that as a sign of things to come, once I started to look a little bit closer on this whole ordeal. But perhaps the worst part of all of this is yet to come. Capcom has already announced that they plan to expand the arcade with more titles, but how? On one hand, I already own the beat 'em up bundle, but I decided to purchase this one anyway, since I own that on the Switch, and I thought getting a copy of some of the games also on PC wouldn't hurt, but we are still missing 2 games from that bundle here, and with this level of backlash, will Capcom even try to port those games? I hope they do, because I honestly think this is the better place to play them, and it would be convenient to have all games in a single place, but only if they finally allow people to purchase them individually, so people who don't want to have duplicate copies of the same game can do so. An even worse scenario would be if Capcom simply ignored the Steam version and decided to only release future bundles on consoles, where the backlash is currently much milder, though I believe once news sites and YouTubers started reporting on this, it would just make the backlash worse. But perhaps the worst scenario though would be if they decided to sell individual games, but only on Steam where the backlash is higher, which in turn would start creating backlash on consoles instead. And just stop right now and count how many times I just said backlash. If you get it right, you get a free lollipop. Non-sequitur aside, Capcom really drove themselves into a corner here, one in which I cannot see them escaping from unless they completely redo the monetization of this title from scratch, which personally I don't think they will. And it's such a shame really, Capcom has really been on a roll lately with Monster Hunter Rise, Resident Evil Village, Monster Hunter Stories 2, The Great Ace Attorney. They've just been publishing great game after great game for all kinds of audiences, so it's a bit frustrating to see their 2021 lineup tarnished by an arcade compilation of all things. One that is already incredibly good and developed by clearly passionate creators, but one that unfortunately needed a bit more business sense to avoid falling into these pitfalls. So, in the end, is Capcom Arcade Stadium the greatest game compilation ever released? No. And unfortunately, I cannot recommend that you purchase Capcom Arcade Stadium unless you're as passionate about arcade games as I am, which is, you know, not the most passionate, but still considerably so. And of course, if there's one thing that happens when you're passionate about something, is that you lose sight of reality. So honestly, this time I really want to know, what do you guys think? Does this collection blows? Or do you guys think maybe I'm just exaggerating a bit too much and you still buy all of it even with all of those problems? Ha! That's a trick question! This collection definitely blows, and that is because it doesn't have Felicia in it.